Jim Collison, we're live from the Heartland Developer Conference 2017 here in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm here with Sam Basu, and Sam, welcome to the Heartland Developer Conference.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. First of all, where you're from, what you do, the company that you work for, those kinds of things.
Sure. So I'm from Pennsylvania, so I'm actually traveling. It's actually my second or third year actually here at HDC.
Oh.
Yeah, so I love coming down here, one of my favorite regional conferences. So I'm a developer advocate. We talk to developers about tech adoption and some of the products that we make. So I work for Progress, which is a company that makes, most .NET developers know us as Telerik. We still make the Telerik line of components and UI suites. Our business is to make developers successful on web, mobile, desktop, you name it. We have the right tools to have developers light up their apps and ship them faster with best UI.
Yeah, kind of make it easier for the average developer to get in there and get their work done. Tell me a little bit about your session. What did you come to speak on today?
Sure. So I was here last year talking about ASP.NET, and we were in a kind of in-between stages. I talked about ASP.NET again, and I talked about the technology stack that makes up ASP.NET now. And it's interesting how things have changed just in this 1 year.
Yeah, I'm interested in that because ASP.NET was one of those conversations we had a lot of for a while. It's kind of faded a little bit. So what, at least in my opinion, what's going on in the world of ASP.NET? Is it?
Sure.
Am I perceiving it correctly?
It's evolved.
Okay.
It's changed. So I think for the last couple of years, you saw this divide amongst web developers. On one side, you had sort of the enterprise devs who were working at a .NET shop, and you are doing ASP.NET hardcore, SQL backends, all out C# and .NET, and you're inside Visual Studio all day long. And then you have sort of the hipsters who are skinny jeans, all on their MacBooks, all out JavaScript, right? So these worlds started kind of going farther and further apart. The JavaScript folks were doing a lot of things with the web stack, their stacks, with Node.js and Python and different types of languages, but it's a very open source world. And things lived in NPM, things lived in Bower, and different places where you kind of stitch together your application based on your needs. Microsoft was kind of in a different island by itself, where you have NuGet packages and you're dealing with .NET, and you're still doing a lot of server-side rendering of your web pages and applications, and then shipping it off to the client. So Microsoft has sort of pivoted in the last couple of years as well to bring these two worlds a little closer, because they really do belong together. It shouldn't be so different. So modern ASP.NET is kind of a mixed bag between what you consider traditional server-side web development and modern client-side web development with JavaScript. So Microsoft and ASP.NET is sort of evolving to accommodate all these developers who want to do .NET, but they also want to do JavaScript, do CSS, do all of these new and cool open source things. And Microsoft, I mean, it might surprise you, Microsoft is one of the biggest contributors to open source. They have made .NET open source, ASP.NET open source. The big parts of Azure is open source. And the tooling has come a long way. So you have Visual Studio, which used to be our bread and butter on Windows. It's funny, like one of the biggest concentrations on MacBooks that you see nowadays is on Microsoft Campus. Because that's how open the nature of the game is. And your operating system, your devices shouldn't matter. Come as you are and pick your IDE, pick your tools as you want. Visual Studio is for Windows, but then you have cross-platform text editors like Visual Studio Code, which it's surprising how much of the JavaScript community has picked up Visual Studio Code. Like folks who would never touch a Microsoft product are using Visual Studio Code as their editor. And then there is Visual Studio for Mac, which is funny, like 3 years down the line, or 3 years sooner, if you had asked me, would Visual Studio ever run on a Mac? You'd laugh at people, right? But now it's the reality. It's a polished app, and it does ASP.NET, it does Azure, it does Xamarin, so it's a good place to be.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to be. I've been doing this for 4 years or so, these interviews, and 4 years ago, there's no way in a million years we would have been having that kind of conversation. Microsoft's come a long way. In your session, tell me a little bit about what were the 1 or 2 major points you were trying to get through to folks.
Yeah, so very recently, .NET Core 2.0 came out. So .NET Core is this written from ground up framework. So .NET got very big. It's great, but it's one giant monolithic framework that ran all your applications, web, desktop, mobile, and it just got very, very big, and it's monolithic. So they said, okay, let's not have this big barrier to entry. A college kid with a little Mac, why does he need to install that huge of a framework and Visual Studio just to write Hello World? let's make this easy for everybody. So they said, let's write .NET Core from the ground up. It's going to be lean, it's modular, and for the first time, it has a cross-platform CLR. So CLR is your runtime for running .NET applications. That runs on Linux and Mac OS. And the footprint is very, very little, so you can actually take a ASP.NET application running on a Raspberry Pi. It's very lightweight. So .NET Core 2.0 just shipped, which kind of, when they first started .NET Core, it was new. So they didn't have all of the APIs, because .NET is like 15 years old. So they have been building it up slowly. So .NET Core sort of brings it up to parity with the rest of the .NET framework, I would say 80% of it. And then it kind of brings into all of these other apps can now migrate to .NET Core from a regular .NET framework. And along with it comes .NET Standard, which is your way of kind of reusing libraries across all of the different .NETs. Because there are a couple of .NETs now. There is .NET Framework, there is .NET Core, there is Mono, which is an implementation of .NET. It's been around for a long time. There is a BCL for Unity. So there are different .NETs. So how do you share code? How do you have portability across all these platforms? So .NET Standards tries to address that head on to say, if you're targeting libraries to be at a certain .NET standard, then your app is assured these APIs on any .NET. And that's how you share code. So, so the evolution of .NET has been interesting, and that's one of the key things we talked about. And also the tooling, and Microsoft really embracing the modern web standards, so to speak. So JavaScript, don't resist. It's going to be everywhere. You cannot keep doing stuff on the server side. It just doesn't scale very well. So Microsoft is letting developers write their applications however they want. So do however much you want to do server side with frameworks like MVC. Web Forms isn't dead. It's just not there in ASP.NET Core, but it's there in the regular .NET framework. And ASP.NET Core, MVC is pretty lean and polished. They are adding new things like Razor Pages, which is a new way of, it's a lightweight page. Doesn't quite have the model and the view on the controller. It's just a lightweight way of rendering something to the client side. And then they're letting you use whatever you feel like. So bring in JavaScript. Use things like Bower to bring in CSS, JavaScript frameworks. Use NPM if that's your thing. And then if you are into SPA or some of these big modern JavaScript frameworks like Angular or React, bring them in. So ASP.NET has gotten really, really good at being very fast. .NET Core is one of the fastest .NETs they've ever shipped.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah, so they did a whole thing with a company called Tech Empower. They do benchmarks of different web frameworks. And it's funny, like Node.js used to be like the fastest thing, and then there's Netty and all of the Java frameworks. Some of these are very lightweight, so that you cannot really compare apples to apples. But .NET Core and ASP.NET running on .NET Core is in the top 10. It's actually faster than Node. It's serving up like just pure plain text over HTTP. It's serving up like 1.5 million per second. So that's crazy fast.
Yeah.
And so the speed is there, the optimization is there, and you get to bring in whatever tools you want to use. So you can use ASP.NET as purely as a web API, so you're just serving up data, or you can mix and match a little bit with server-side stuff and client-side things with Angular. JavaScript is an interesting community. Every day you wake up, there's a new framework that is very popular.
It's like a new Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You know, there's a new coin, there's a new altcoin every day. There's a new version of JavaScript.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are some big guys. There's Angular, there is React, there is Vue, there's Aurelia, and all of these things work just perfectly fine with your ASP.NET stack because you get to write your views however you want. Microsoft doesn't hold your hands back. So if you want to do an entire thing server side, do it from MVC. If you want to mix and match and bring in some JavaScript, do it on the client side.
Yeah, with all that, man, you
I've been
covered
rambling.
a lot of, no, it's great. You covered a lot of ground pretty fast. How does the average consumer, the average developer, the average person really know where to go in this world of everything? We used to have camps, right? And you were, you're .NET or Java, and they would fight each other like, in the middle of the night, they'd meet in the parking lot and fight. Today, we seemingly all get along in the same sandbox. How do developers know where to go at this point?
It's a challenge, no doubt about it. It's hard for professionals to stay on top of the cutting edge stuff, and because it's nonstop coming. So start small. Start with what your team knows how to do. What's the app that you are building? What's the code base that you want to maintain going forward? And sometimes I see people picking up frameworks and doing it just because, like, for the heck of it, it's cool. Everybody else is doing Angular, so we should too. But make sure it works for you, make sure you understand these things. And in terms of your IDEs and tools and platforms that you're on, it really doesn't matter. So you can be on Visual Studio on Windows, and I could be on Visual Studio Code on my Mac, and we could be both working simultaneously on the same project. It doesn't matter anymore because Visual Studio has gotten that portability down. So solution files, project files, they're all very portable. So we can both be pushing to a GitHub repo, and it's just like your tools and your OS doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So start small. If you have a lot of legacy apps, like web forms is where people say it's dying, but I mean, I see enterprises, $1 million businesses being run on web forms. It's still very productive. So don't make the big jump to ASP.NET Core 2 right away, because it's going to be a lot of change. Take small bites. Web forms and MVC can coexist. Move your app over to MVC slowly if you are worth or if your business can spend the money to upgrade your app.
Yeah, you're the second core conversation I've had, Dustin, who was before you were talking about this as well. So I'm getting the impression it's like core's still a little early. Maybe it's not ready to jump right to it. There's some right.
So it is early days, but it's still been 2 years. If you have a greenfield app where you can start from scratch, by all means look at core, because you can do full out MVC on core. There's nothing stopping you. Plus you get to kind of mix and match the JavaScript things. It's where you have a legacy app and you want to slowly convert it over. Take baby steps. Move it to MVC first, move it to core 1.x first, and then move it to core 2.x.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some work in there. You might need some help, I would imagine, making some of those jumps to be able to get those, pieces done. Where TFS or Git? What do you prefer?
I prefer GitHub for anything open source. GitHub also does enterprise layer things, and even within TFS, it doesn't really matter because TFS does GitHub hosting as well, and Microsoft has VSTS, which is Visual Studio Team Services, which is all of the TFS orchestration in the cloud. So it doesn't matter. Pick your CI/CD pipelines based on what suits your app and your
what
team.
You're most comfortable with. It seems like Git seems to be more popular now than TFS, although I know some organizations that use that. So. Either way. Have you done any work? So where's .NET in relation to Azure services? So have you done any work, or have you looked as far as having Azure as the host provider, or just pushing that stuff directly with Azure?
I haven't played with Azure services a whole lot, but I mean, Azure is gigantic.
Yeah,
like if you just go to
it's a beast.
The Azure homepage and you do the little drop down, it's
a beast. It used to be a lot easier. I'll be honest with you. Back when it was about 7 services,
now it's a lot.
You could kind of understand it. It's a beast.
Yeah. So what they're trying to do with Azure is serve, again, different types of needs, right? So if you use it Azure as like platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, or lightweight like backend as a service to your mobile apps. And then serverless is where Azure Functions and Azure Services fit. All of that is welcome. And behind the scenes, you get some choices on how you want to host things. So Azure is, again, come as you are. So it doesn't need to be Windows Server at all. You can bring in Linux. You can bring in other VMs and just host your apps just like that. A new trend nowadays is going serverless, where you're kind of taking there's a server behind the scenes. It's kind of a bad naming thing, but it's not your server. So they're spinning things up and you're paying for usage, and only as little of the Azure things that you need. So again, these are nice solutions to have as to how you host your app. I live nowadays a lot on the mobile landscape, so I'm doing a lot of Xamarin and iOS and Android. Azure really comes in nicely when it comes to having services that kind of complement your mobile app on the back end.
Yeah, are you using mobile services on Azure?
We do that. We have our services as well. We have a thing called Kinvey, which is backend as a service. There is Amazon. There is a host of providers. So again, look around and see what works for you.
Yeah, well, it can sometimes be as confusing as the number of .NET versions that are out there. There's so many available services. I just found one yesterday, a media indexer on Azure that allows me to upload audio content, and it converts it into text for me. I'll be running some tests on it, but there's a lot. There is just a ton of stuff to do out there.
Computing, it's like limitless on Azure, and some of the things that they're doing, like with machine learning and AI, it's just a lot of computation, and they can pull it off.
There's some great stuff. I got some
Yeah.
great ideas for the Azure team.
Yes.
We'll save that for another session.
Right.
Any really interesting questions that you got in your session?
You know, one of the things that I think .NET developers are trying to get their minds around is all of this open source things are hitting them, right? So where's the middle ground where I can stay inside of Visual Studio and yet I can do all of these JavaScripty and open sourcey things? And there is a middle ground. So for example, I mean, I know folks who are completely on the Angular, React, and the JavaScript boat. And they have their own technology stack. They don't really use Visual Studio. But where ASP.NET comes in is, even if you have a full-on JavaScript front end, you can still use ASP.NET to serve up your data as APIs. Or if you are a .NET shop and you're used to Visual Studio, maybe you are using a Mac, because Macs are really good dev devices, even for .NET developers. Like I'm on a Mac and I write C# and .NET all day long. That's the new reality, and that's wonderful.
So weird.
It is, but it's wonderful,
Yeah.
right? Because my choice of device
That's really weird.
just doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's great.
So for folks like us who are open to other platforms, it's nice to have all of these tools. Visual Studio Code is nice. Visual Studio Mac is surprisingly nice, given how new it is. It's an evolution of Xamarin Studio, which used to be a polished thing. Now that it's got some Azure things built in. You can do ASP.NET on it. So Visual Studio isn't a problem anymore. You can run Visual Studio anywhere you want. It is how you stitch together your applications. That sometimes is still a challenge because you're never sure what exactly you're going to need and how you're going to maintain it moving forward. I met with a customer who had a big MVC app. And he said we had an architect who was all about Angular. So for 2 years we went down that route, and then he got let go. And then the new guy likes React. So I'm not even sure what I'm doing because there's this mix and match that's going on. So again, pick something that really works. When you come to picking some of these JavaScript things, know that there's always some choices on how you bring in these dependencies and how you manage them. When it comes to package managers, there is NuGet. NuGet will keep serving your .NET DLLs because they have made that distinction, that fork, very clear. So the folks who maintain and run JavaScript frameworks and CSS libraries and things like that, they don't put their stuff in NuGet because their audience doesn't use NuGet. It's the .NET devs who use NuGet. And Microsoft, for the longest time, were copying over things from other repositories and bringing them over to NuGet and maintaining them, which was never fun. So they said, we're going to stop doing that. So NuGet is going to keep serving just .NET DLLs. And NuGet also plays a very important part with .NET Core because when you are bootstrapping an app with just .NET Core, your references are minimum. And those are served up from NuGet. That's how it resolves your references and brings the bits down to actually run and bootstrap your app. And then for everything else, go to Bower, go to NPM, go to Webpack, use whatever bundling tool that you want to use for your client-side orchestration. And it's funny that client-side needs to be orchestrated in the first place because client-side has gotten so complicated. You might have some less or SAS things where you're writing CSS, but with some bells and whistles, that needs to be compiled down to plain CSS. You might be writing your app in TypeScript. If you're doing Angular, you're writing TypeScript mostly. That needs to be compiled down to JavaScript. So all of these are pre-built steps that apps need to do before they can be built and deployed. So there's some help. There is things like Grunt and Gulp, which are JavaScript automation tools. And this is where you can configure, go build this, go do that, put it here. Here's why my pipeline looks like. Once everything is good to go, then I build and then I ship. So .NET developers have some choice whether they want to keep using the stuff that comes inbuilt with .NET and ASP.NET. ASP.NET will do bundling and minification, but you can also bring in Gulp. You can bring in Grunt to kind of do these extra things.
Yeah.
So
bottom
line is tooling has come a long way. Take a look at .NET Core 2.0. It's got most of the API surface area that you'll be looking for, and then take baby steps to actually migrate your app. If you're doing anything new or greenfield, definitely take a look at some of the new things.
Yeah, you're the second person to say that today, so I think we're ready. I mean, I think Core is ready for brand new folks who are out there getting started. probably a great place to get going.
Yeah, it's funny. So I did my session early in the morning, and then Dustin followed me. And so for attendees, hopefully it's a nice build-up, because we are talking about the same things. And this is an exciting and interesting time. It's a different Microsoft. It's a different .NET. It's not your grandpa's tooling anymore. Things have come a long way. If you do not like any of this change, I mean, you can stay happily inside of Visual Studio and build server-side web apps for the longest time. Nothing is changing. But if you're open to change, if you want to bring on some of these client-side features, because browsers are very powerful. Browser is like a VM, and JavaScript is everywhere. So bring them in and slowly consume bits that make sense to you.
A browser is a VM. That's a good quote from you, Sam. I appreciate you taking the time to. And you're right. We just flipped you. Dustin was here earlier, and now you're here. But you guys are both saying the same thing. That's great to hear, by the way, just as we get consistent messages in relation to this. So, Sam, I appreciate the time. So